The Pax Dei devs dropped this crazy bomb this morning. Most of it is thanking the community, but near the end, they said this. We can't wait to show you all of the changes and improvements we've made in our next test phase, which should be available before too long. In the first quarter of 2024. I'm pretty sure no one was expecting a new test so soon, but now the important question is, what will the test focus on? In the post that came with the announcement, Mainframe talked about expanding the building content and introducing new building parts that were tied to tiers in order to diversify the existing structures. I'm sure many of you saw how samey all of the buildings in the game were, so these new options should help players add more personality to their individual creations. However, this won't be the focus of the next test because the first building test was so successful, so building will basically be unchanged in Alpha 2. They go on to talk about resources and crafting though, and this is what we'll probably be testing next. They list off resource balancing, recipe adjustments, progression and skills, crafting failure, stamina while gathering, and inventory management as things they wanted to adjust and improve. But the detail in which they did so really makes me think that the next test will be for crafting, gathering, and exploration specifically. In the announcement, they talked about how they wanted players to have a reason to explore, and spreading the rarer resources out into the wildlands would be part of their rebalancing since some resources were too abundant or too scarce. I can see flax being harder to find now since their spawn points were pretty abundant near my clan's location, and leveling up Taylor was just a time sink standing in front of the loom. Leather was practically non-existent through hunting animals, so players were farming spirits for leather, which made complete sense, and I can see this being adjusted for the next test as well. Next, they wanted to review the current recipe list and adjust the difficulty of those recipes where it didn't make sense. I only really experienced leatherworking, and there were definitely a handful of items that had a level requirement that didn't seem right. Whatever they decide to do here should be heavily given feedback, so the final result in the release of the game in the future, like 20 years from now, feels really good to grind through. The progression and skills section was particularly interesting. They said some of the crafting skills demand excessive grinding and some are missing and still need a lot of work. In the alpha test, cooking and alchemy were practically non-existent. Then they said, we're adding a lot of content for the next test, which we hope will give you many more reasons to explore the world. Better cooking and alchemy recipes would give players more health and stamina to safely explore the more dangerous areas of Pax Dei, as well as find the rarer materials in those areas to create even better items, which is what a good MMO gaming loop should do. They go on to say, we're also evaluating which recipes should belong to processing versus regular crafters to prevent players from being stationary for extended periods of time during crafting. They're of course talking about flax and linen. This is interesting though. Tailor processing in Pax Dei was originally tied to the loom and making cloth, while players had to sit in front of the spinning wheel to manually create thread. I'm willing to bet that the functions for those two have been swapped. I predict that in the next test, players will be able to dump the thread into the spinning wheel and it'll automatically process the thread over time. Then when it's done, players will manually create cloth on the loom. In my opinion, that would be the easiest way to solve the AFK crafting problem that Flax has. Now, I personally hate automatic processing since it's essentially an artificial time gate, but it does serve a function to slow crafting down. And while something is processing, you can just go and do something else in the meantime. I do hope they come up with a different solution during development, but until I come up with a better solution, it's better that I just deal with it for now. Another part of their statement can be tied to iron and metalworking. In Alpha 1, players only needed to gather titanic boatloads of iron ore in order to make higher quality metals. What they've probably done is introduce mining nodes and materials in the distant and difficult wildlands that make processing steel, Damascus steel, and carbon steel easier to make. By easier, I mean you don't need 1800 iron ore, which is 7.2 full inventories of iron ore, to make 3 high carbon steel ingots or 2 Damascus steel ingots, not including the required charcoal fuel. And yes, I did the math. The Tier 4 magic leg plates requires 24 steel ingots to make just the steel parts of the item. Those 24 ingots requires 720 iron ore to make. This is why I expect the higher tier steel recipes to require less iron and some rarer ore only found in the wildlands. In addition to the sheer monotony of gathering that many materials for a single craft, if you failed that craft like Narc famously did, you would lose every single item as well, throwing all of the time it took to gather all of those materials into the toilet. Thankfully, this is being adjusted and you'll receive materials back depending on how badly you finish the craft. They also mentioned that eventually they wanted to add mechanics that would allow players to mastercraft items if they managed to have a perfect success on a craft. This is something that they mentioned in the interview with Narc, and it's not something I'm excited about, but we'll talk about gacha-style crafting in another video. They finished off the announcement by talking about stamina and inventory systems. It says we probably won't remove stamina cost from resource harvesting loops, but the system needs tuning. They want to scale the mechanics with player skill levels, so if you're a high skill gatherer with a tier 4 gathering tool, you won't find yourself standing still doing nothing while waiting for your stamina to come back so you can continue gathering. They want this mechanic to be a sort of reward for players who decide to dedicate themselves to gathering, which makes complete sense. As for the inventory, it basically comes down to the difficulty of making the system necessary while avoiding the tedium of manually organizing everything. Due to that difficulty of the balancing act, the inventory system is something they plan to improve later on. During the Narc interview, they did mention adding tiers of furniture to increase storage capacity, so we can look forward to that, I guess. Then they closed the announcement with thanks and let us know that the alpha will pop up in the first quarter of 2024. So in my opinion, the focus of the Alpha 2 test is going to be more crafting and gathering, but that gathering will be from deeper in the wildlands. Maybe we'll see more dangerous enemies this time. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Either way, I'm really excited to jump in and see how they've adjusted these systems, and I really hope that I can join in this test as well. I do have a question for you though. If these alpha tests are happening so quickly, does that mean the overall development of Pax Dei will be relatively quick as well? Is it possible that it could actually release before Ashes of Creation? Anyway, that's all I got for you today. You're welcome.